I feel like the Chainsaw Man Rezi arc romance doesn't actually make a whole lot of sense to me, right? First of all, let's take a look at the approach, right? Now, of course, if you watch the movie or you read the manga or any of that stuff, you already know that Rezi approached Denji with the intentions of killing him. So initially, the movie trying to set up, if you have no prior knowledge, is that Rezi approached Denji in this sort of random chance encounter. Now, I also understand that Denji is a teenage boy with very little sort of social awareness and cues. So when he met Rezi in the phone booth, it was to him a very sort of just magical random moment that a girl come up to him and hide with him in this confined spaces because they're really really close with each other, right? And then she's all flirty with him as well, and then she just dipped out. And to him, that really left a strong impression of him. Now, obviously, all this was sort of pre-planned by Rezi to approach Denji because she wanted to kill him, and that was her initial goal. But from an audience perspective, if you don't have this prior knowledge and if you're just first time watching this, then you will feel like this is a very typical romance tropes of the classic random encounter. Now, the problem here is that this trope is really a bad way of introducing two character these days, because we know that a girl like Rezi, right, in real life, they would never approach a guy that they never met before randomly and in a confined space and be flirty with him. The reason for this is just because women feel unsafe around men, right? Like, and if you want to disagree with me saying, oh, I'm just being like a weird, maybe women doesn't want to approach me or whatever, it's not that. If you remember that popular meme that a man or a bear, right? That man versus bear questions for women, and overwhelming majority of women choose bear. There's a good reason for it. It's because women in general don't know if the guy is going to be a weirdo or they're going to be somebody that's normal. And also, men or human being in general is really way more unpredictable, right? So with that prior knowledge in mind, you just instantly have a bit of a red flag in your head as an audience member, right? So I'm not saying it doesn't make any sense in the context of the story, but all I'm saying this is that it doesn't really build that believable romance encounter in your head, and you instantly know that there's something that's sinister in it. Now, granted, if you went to watch Chainsaw Man, if you have sort of season 1 knowledge about the show, or in general you just read the manga already, then you clearly can see that makes perfect amount of sense, that Rezi is no ordinary girl. But if you just view the anime movie itself and you see that happening, you're like, that is something highly suspicious. So I just think that that kind of setup itself doesn't make any sense, right? No normal girl, especially a pretty girl like Rezi, with none of her friends around, she just randomly approach a guy and have a confined space with him and then be a little flirty and dip out, right? That's no woman would ever do that. No sane, normal, rational woman would do that. The only time that kind of things would happen is that if this woman already has prior knowledge, has sort of prior connection with you, and they have a little bit of interest in you, and they would do a little flirty things, but only if they already have some sort of pre-existing, like established connection that is outside of romance, right? They could be a coworker, they could be somebody that just sees them coming to a gym regularly, or they could have just been anywhere where they have a regular interaction. They could be a friends of a friend, they could met at a party or something like that. So all of that would have been a much, in my personal opinion, believable approach as an audience member. Now again, in the context of the story, it does make sense, but outside of that, as an audience member, you want me to believe that Rezi is this innocent girl approaching this random guy in middle of nowhere and alone with him, and she's all flirty with him? Ain't no way. That's never gonna happen. Instant red flag immediately. I already know that this is not gonna be a romance. And if you don't have any prior knowledge, that should be like sort of bring you out of the idea that this is going to be more of a romance story. Again, these are my opinions. So that's the first thing. The encounter itself doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So the second things that I have with this is how the romance is developed, or at least how it's framed. Now, I understand that the anime itself is obviously targeted mostly towards guys, so there is a greater emphasis on Rezi, and I really just feel like Rezi is like the main things of the show. She pretty much just rezzed everyone else. I guess it makes sense why her name is Rezi. Really felt the charms of her, and I understand that. That makes perfect sense, right? However, I feel like this kind of defeated the purpose of it being a romance story between Denji and Rezi. It feels more like a romance or a potential romance story between you, the audience, with Rezi. That has become sort of a center stage, and I just didn't really think that's a good way. Now, obviously, that could be, so some people are into. I play a lot of gacha games, so I understand that this sort of parasocial relationship establishments or hook you in with a waifu bait is a fairly common trope, right? And that's fairly successful, and I think they did a good job of making this waifu bait. But unfortunately, I'm watching a romance story between Rezi and Denji, right? I know that I will never have a chance with this because she's not real. She'll never meet me because she's a drawing. And so I want to see a story that is focused on between Rezi and Denji. And I just don't think there's enough of that in the show. There are a lot of scenes in the show that shows Rezi's charm, but not a whole lot in terms of like how these two are so deeply connected with each other. The third thing is that I just think the romance arc didn't really make a whole lot of sense in the end is how many people Rezi has killed. I find it very interesting. A lot of audience reactions towards the end of the movie is that Rezi was killed, denied this happy life with Denji, and denied this cool life to start with Denji. But problem here is that she killed a lot of people, right? Obviously, Rezi didn't actually die. She just like sort of passed out because of the wound that Makima inflict on her. But the problem here is that I think because she killed so many people, it actually does make sense that she doesn't really deserve to have like a happy ending. Just because of the fact that she killed like a bajillion amount of people. And think about it this way, right? Every single one of the people that she has accidentally or intentionally murdered could have a equally tragic, happy, and romantic love story of their own. And I actually kind of like the way that the movie did, or the story did, the manga, whatever, did with the framing of like just random innocent people, the victims of Rezi's rampage, and the indifferences and complete carelessness towards the people that she just killed, either as a collateral or intentional, right? So there's the scenes where she walked past all these dead and wounded people, and there's one guy on the ground, and he was heavily wounded. He's like, "You're this devil," and I thought that was really good. That showed that Rezi's carelessness and killing all these peoples, that these are peoples that they killed. Also, these other people could just equally has a beautiful romance story as Rezi and Denji, right? And so I do think that the ending of the show was appropriate. I'm glad that she wasn't really killed, because again, I don't really think murder is good. I don't think retributive justice is actual justice, because it doesn't really bring all the dead people back to life, and Rezi's life doesn't equal to thousands of others' lives either. So there's nothing that killing Rezi would actually do. And I'm kind of glad that at least in the later medias, they did say that she's not dead, but she's just imprisoned and later controlled by Makima, etc. But those are other stories. And now this obviously brings me to the last problem I have with how the romance is framed. People have been saying like, oh, it's amazing love story. But the problem here is that if you know later parts of the Chainsaw Man's, you'll know that he just moved on to another girl. He just have another amazing romance with a different girl and then end up with the same tragic ending. And I just don't think that makes a good romance story, right? With that kind of knowledge in mind, right? So a lot of the tragedy between Romeo and Juliet is that it feels like, at least with the story, why Romeo and Juliet has such a strong impact is because these two are sort of like fated lover, ideally they were supposed to just be their soulmates towards each other. And that their one and only one for each other, and they would never ever encounter somebody that's so close with them, right? Have such a romance with them. That's the implication, and that is also what the movie was trying to do. But with the knowledge that Denji finds another girl to pine over, and they also have another amazing romance, as well as several other women later on, you just feels like, okay, well, it's just one romance story. Now, I don't really think there's anything wrong with people moving on from their relationship in real life. That's obviously totally normal, and I think it's completely fine. There's nothing wrong with finding new loves, right? When the old one ended, there is nothing wrong with that. But when you're trying to tell a heartstring tugging moving story, you kind of don't want to have that knowledge is that, oh, well, it's just one romance in the string of romance, right? Makes it feels more like, not that important. Yeah, it's tragic, but you know what? Denji's gonna find another girl, and he's gonna have another amazing romance with her. And then, even if that ends in tragedy, you know that there's gonna be another romance coming out. And that is also the parts where I just find that it brings this sort of whole like Romeo and Juliet story they're trying to tell down a notch. Anyway, yeah, that's my thoughts on the Chainsaw Man movie.